In this video, I'm going to talk about what you need to do to prepare to paint your army. A little bit of background. There are two main types of miniatures games. There's the good ones and the bad ones. That's not actually, well, that is true, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about kind of a classification of scale. There are skirmish games and there are army games. Now in a skirmish game, usually you have between 3 and maybe as many as 20 figures on your force, and so does your opponent. In an army game, you're going to have a lot more, anywhere from 50 to a couple hundred sometimes. A skirmish game would be something maybe like along the lines of old school Mordheim from Games Workshop, old school Necromunda from Games Workshop, Infinity, Mercs. Some people will even tell you that War Machine is still a skirmish game, although there are times when you can obviously have quite a large army. Army games, Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, Kings of War, Warpath. There's a lot of war involved in that. And those are big, huge amounts of figures in the army. So with small skirmish games, a lot of times you will be building a force. Let's take a look at something like Necromunda. It's a gang. Okay, Necromunda, you've got a gang. That's your war band. You don't want them to look all identical. You want them to look a bit different. They may share some colors. You know, they may all have a blue bandana or like a red, kerchief. Is that a word? I'm not sure. But they may have that kind of stuff. And you have to keep track of that, but you don't have to paint them all to look the same. They look, they look different because they're individuals. That's the point of the skirmish. In an army, you are pretty much dressed like everybody else. Any of you out there who've been in the military in the real world know that you were not asked what color you'd like your outfit to be when you first showed up. You can tell that I wasn't in the military because I called it an outfit and not a uniform. So when you're building and planning your army, you want to make sure that you know exactly how you're going to paint them ahead of time. And this is not just what color you're going to paint them. This is a lot more than that. This is getting into what I like to call the recipe. Exactly step by step, every paint you use, exactly in whatever order. Is it wet? Are you doing it dry brushing? What are you doing? I write it all, well, I don't write it down, I actually punch it into my phone, so I've constantly got it with me. But you want to plan that stuff out ahead of time when you're going to start painting your army. And the best way to do that is to get some test models, okay? So let's say that you're a Space Marines player, which according to the demographics, 40% of you are. What you can do is you can go onto eBay and you can get some test models from there. You can go and try to find, every time they come out with a new edition of 40K, there's something called a starter box. And in that starter box, there are usually going to be Space Marines. Well, the starter box for 6th edition is called Dark Vengeance, and it's got Chaos Space Marines, which are close. But if you go back to the 5th edition starter box, which was called Assault on Black Reach, you do a search on eBay for Assault on Black Reach, you can probably find inexpensive models, inexpensive Space Marine models. They're snapped together real quick and easy. This is part of a sprue from Assault on Black Reach. You can see that there are guys here and they go together pretty quick and easy. They just snap together. Normal Space Marines are legs, 2 pieces of torso, 2 arms, gun, head, shoulder pads, backpack. All those pieces just make up one guy. In this, it's body, gun, backpack. That's it. So you get those things together, and then you want to get a couple, at least a couple. Your best bet, if you're really not sure which direction you're going to go, is to maybe get as many as 6. And what you do is you sit down and you figure, okay, this is how I'm going to prime them. So you first figure out what color are they going to be. Let's say they're space wolves, okay? They're kind of a bluish gray. So you could prime them gray to start with, either with a rattle can or an airbrush. And I would do 1. If you're absolutely sure this is the primer I'm going to use, then do all of them at once because it just makes more sense. But you start painting on 1 and you write down everything you're doing. And when you get to the point where you don't like it, then you back up a step and you do all the steps you did up to that point to the 2nd figure. And then you'd make a change from there, and you just keep progressing. I'm building a Black Templar army. And I've started doing this just recently. So I got some Assault on Blackreach guys, and I primed them black. And then with my airbrush, I dusted them kind of from above with a really super dark gray. And that kind of gives them a little bit of a highlight built in immediately. From there, I then took another dry brush, did some more dark gray, and then I started working on the shoulder pads. That's where I first hit my first snag. There's these two guys right here, okay? This one was the one where I got to the point with the shoulder pads and said, nope, that didn't work. And then I started on this guy, and I went from there. Luckily, I was able to basically get finished with my recipe with this one guy because I really only had these two guys put together. I hadn't thought that far ahead. This is why I say that if you're on the fence, you really want to try to get at least maybe 6 models together to work for, your test models. Let's say you're not a Space Marine player. If you're not a Space Marine player, what your best bet's going to be, in my opinion, is to probably go onto eBay and find somebody else who's got models that they're selling that either already have paint on them, or they came in some sort of kit, or they're blowing them out, or doing whatever. Normally, if you buy models online, on eBay, let's say, and they've got paint on them, most people are going to strip those guys, unless the paint job is really good for some reason, but generally you're going to strip them, and then you're going to repaint them from there. For test models, you could just prime right over. Unless the paint is really glopped on there, you could just prime right over the top of whatever paint job you get in the mail, and then just use that as your test piece. And then once you figure out exactly what you want to do with your recipe, then all your good models, the ones you've spent months building, and you've got a whole bunch of them now, those are the ones that you then take and start doing the actual process. You follow your process step by step by step. I usually like to work in 5s and do 5 models at a time, kind of get a little bit of a assembly line going. So while you start on this one, by the time you get to this one, the first one's dry, so you can do the next step. Works out great. So something like these, you either find models that are going to work for you online, or even if you've got old models, anything you got laying around, use those as your tests, because you really don't want to start testing your technique on models that you really want to put in your army, because then you're going to have to either go back and strip them, or you're going to have to prime over them and start over. So work on models that are not important, get exactly what you want. And I cannot stress this enough, write it down. You want to write down exactly what you're doing. If you decide to take some time off, 3-4 months, let's say, in between painting and the next time that you paint, if you're me, you're going to forget. You're going to forget in 2 weeks because my memory is terrible. But most people will definitely forget in 2 to 3 months exactly what they were doing. So that's why you always want to make sure you write that stuff down. Basically, go out, eBay, find models, junky ones, doesn't matter, prime them, and start working. And you work in that process where you paint one, and when you screw it up, then you back up a step. It's kind of like Control-Z, you undo, and then you do that same process up to that point on the second model. And then when you get to that point, you go, okay, well, I didn't like that color, what can I do differently? And then you work from there. And then you just keep going, and then hopefully you'll eventually get something you're happy with. And then you take this, you use this as your model, you keep it on your table, and as you're painting, following your list of information, your list of steps for your recipe, you can constantly look back and refer to this model and go from there.